A young father sits trembling in a freezing car, holding his 6-month-old baby wrapped in every blanket he owns while snow piles against the windshield and his phone. Screen shows $17 in his bank account, but then a knock on the window makes him look up, and the man standing there in an expensive coat is about to offer him something that will change everything except. The catch is, this stranger is actually the CEO of the company that just fired him 2 weeks ago, and what happens next will leave you speechless, because this is not just a story about a handshake or a job offer. This is about what one father was willing to sacrifice and what one powerful man was willing to risk when he saw something in that car that reminded him of his own darkest hour. So stay with me, because by the end of this story, you will understand why sometimes rock bottom is actually the foundation for something extraordinary. Marcus Chen was 26 years old when his world collapsed, and it happened on a Tuesday, which he would always remember because Tuesdays were supposed to be easy days at the warehouse where he worked as a logistics coordinator for Titan Point Industries, one of the largest shipping companies on the East Coast. And Marcus had been proud of that job because it paid $42,000 a year, which was not much, but it was enough to cover rent and daycare and groceries for himself and his daughter, Emma, who had just turned 6 months old and had her mother's eyes, which was both a blessing and a curse, because looking at Emma meant seeing Sophie, and Sophie was gone not by choice but because childbirth complications had taken her 3 days after Emma was born, and Marcus had been alone ever since, learning how to change diapers while his hand still shook with grief, and learning how to warm bottles at 3 in the morning while tears ran down his face, and learning how to keep going when every single part of him wanted to stop. The firing came without warning, and Marcus still remembered standing in the HR office while a woman with red glasses told him that the company was downsizing and his position was being eliminated, and he had 2 weeks severance, and she was very sorry, but these decisions were made at the corporate level and there was nothing anyone could do. And Marcus had nodded and signed the papers and walked out to his car and sat there for 20 minutes. Trying to figure out how to breathe, because 2 weeks severance was $1,600 and rent was $1,200 and daycare was $300 a week, and food and diapers and formula and utilities and his car payment, and suddenly the math was not working, and he could feel panic rising in his chest like cold water. He applied everywhere, and Marcus Blum is not proud, so he applied to fast food restaurants and retail stores and gas stations and cleaning companies and anywhere that would take a resume. But every place either never called back or said they would let him know, or offered him part-time minimum wage, which was $7.25 an hour and could not cover daycare, let alone everything else. And meanwhile, the severance money disappeared like water through his fingers. And then rent was due, and Marcus called his landlord, Mr. Kowalski, and explained the situation and asked for just 2 weeks extension. And Mr. Kowalski said he was sorry, but he had bills too, and if Marcus could not pay, then he would have to start eviction proceedings, and that was just business, nothing personal. Marcus packed everything he and Emma owned into his 2008 Honda Civic, which had 173,000 miles on it and a broken heating system that only worked intermittently, and he put Emma's car seat in the back and filled the trunk with their clothes and her diapers and formula and blankets and his laptop and a few photos of Sophie, and everything else got left behind because there was no room and nowhere to take it. And then he drove away from the apartment that had been their home, and he did not look back, because looking back would have broken him completely. The first night in the car was the hardest because Emma cried for 2 hours straight, and Marcus held her and walked around the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store and sang every lullaby he could remember, and some he made up, and finally, she fell asleep against his chest, and he put her back in the car seat and reclined his seat and tried to sleep, but he could not, because every sound made him jump, and he kept checking to make sure she was breathing, and the temperature kept dropping, and he ran the car for heat until the gas gauge got too low, and then he wrapped her in every blanket and held her against him and prayed for morning. Days turned into a week, and Marcus developed a routine, because humans are good at adapting even to impossible situations, and his routine was wake up at 6 when Emma woke up and change her diaper in the back seat and feed her a bottle, and then drive to the public library when it opened at 9 and use the bathroom to wash both of them as best he could in the sink, and then sit in the library all day applying for jobs on his laptop while Emma slept in her carrier or played with the rattle that used to be her favorite toy. And then when the library closed at 6, he would drive to different parking lots each night, because he had learned that staying in one place too long attracted attention, and attention meant police, and police meant questions, and questions meant child protective services, and Marcus would rather die than lose Emma. He was down to $17, and that was everything, and his gas tank was nearly empty, and Emma was running low on formula and diapers, and Marcus sat in his car in the parking lot of a Walmart at 11 at night and looked at that number on his phone screen and felt something inside him give way, because he had been strong for so long, and he had kept going when anyone else would have quit, and he had done everything right, or at least he had tried to do everything right, and it had not mattered, because the universe did not care about trying, it only cared about results, and his result was $17 and a baby. who depended on him and no way forward that he could sit. Started snowing around midnight, and Marcus had never been religious, but he prayed anyway because what else was there to do? And he prayed that Emma would be okay, and that someone would hire him, and that the car would not break down, and that tomorrow would be better than today, even though he had no reason to believe it would be. And Emma slept in her car seat, wrapped in 3 blankets and a jacket, and Marcus watched the snow pile up on the windshield and felt the cold seeping through the broken heating system and thought about Sophie and wondered if she could see them now and what she would think. Knock on the window came at 1:15 in the morning, and Marcus jerked awake, and his first thought was police, and his second thought was child services, and his third thought was that he needed to protect Emma no matter what. And he looked at the window and saw a man standing there in an expensive black coat with snow on his shoulders, and the man gestured for Marcus to roll down the window. And Marcus hesitated but then did, because what choice did he have? The man was maybe 50 years old with gray hair and tired eyes, and he looked at Marcus and then at Emma, sleeping in the back seat, and then back at Marcus, and he said, "Are you okay?" And his voice was quiet, like he did not want to wake the baby. And Marcus wanted to lie, but he was so tired of lying and pretending and holding everything together, so he just shook his head, and the man nodded like he understood, and said, "What is your name?" And Marcus said, "Marcus Chen." And the man went very still, and said, "Say that again." Marcus repeated his name, and the man stared at him and said, "You worked at Titan Point," and Marcus felt his stomach drop because this was it. This was someone from the company, and they were going to call the police or do something worse, but instead the man said, "I am James Whitmore. I am the CEO of Titan Point, and I was the one who approved the downsizing that cost you your job." The world seemed to stop, and Marcus could not process what he was hearing, because why would the CEO of a billion-dollar company be in a Walmart parking lot at 1 in the morning talking to him? And James must have seen the confusion, because he said, "I come here sometimes when I cannot sleep, and I drive around and I think about the decisions I make and the people they affect, and tonight I saw your car, and I saw the baby seat, and something made me up." James looked at Emma again, and his expression changed to something Marcus could not read, and James said, "I had a daughter once, and her name was Rachel, and when she was 6 months old, I was exactly where you are now, sleeping in my car, because I had lost everything, and my wife had left, and I had nothing except Rachel and $17 in my bank account." And Marcus felt his breath catch, because that was the exact amount he had. And James said, "A stranger helped me that night, and he gave me a chance when no one else would, and he told me to pay it forward someday when I could, and I built Titan Point from nothing, and I became successful, and I forgot that promise until tonight when I saw you." James said, "I am going to help you, but not the way you think, and I am not just going to give you money or give you a job, because that does not fix anything long term, and what I am going to do is give you a real opportunity, but you have to work for it, and you have to prove yourself, and if you do, then I will make sure you and your daughter never sleep in a car again, but if you fail, then you fail, and I cannot help you again. So the question is, are you willing to try?" Marcus did not hesitate, and he said yes, because what else could he say? And James nodded, and pulled out his phone and made a call, and 15 minutes later a hotel shuttle arrived, and James said, "Go get a room, and get some sleep, and be at this address tomorrow at 8 in the morning," and he handed Marcus a business card and 5 $100 bills, and Marcus tried to refuse the money, but James said, "It is not charity, it is an advance on your first paycheck." And then James walked back to his car, which Marcus now saw was a Tesla parked 3 spots away, and drove off into the snow, sat there holding the money and the business card and wondering if he had imagined the whole thing. But Emma stirred in her car seat and made a small sound, and Marcus looked at her and thought about Sophie, and thought about second chances, and thought about strangers who help people in parking lots, and then he started the car and followed the hotel shuttle. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the address on the business card, which was not the Titan Point headquarters, but a small office building on the east side of the city, and James was waiting inside, along with 3 other people, and James said, "This is my personal team, and we are starting a new division, focused on logistics, innovation, and I need someone who understands the warehouse-level operations but also has the desperation and the hunger to think differently, and that someone is you, if you want it." Marcus spent the next 6 months working harder than he had ever worked in his life, and he learned supply chain optimization and inventory management systems and data analytics, and James personally mentored him and pushed him and never let him settle for good enough. And Emma went to a daycare that James arranged, and Marcus lived in a small apartment that James helped him get, and slowly, very slowly, Marcus started to believe that maybe things could actually be okay. The new division launched 18 months later, and it revolutionized how Titan Point handled last-mile delivery and saved the company $43 million in the first year, and Marcus was promoted to director and then VP, and his salary went from $42,000 to $180,000, and he could afford a real house and good childcare and college savings for Emma and everything he had dreamed about when he was sitting in that car with $17. But the real change happened 5 years after that night in the parking lot when Marcus was now 31 years old and successful and respected, and he was driving home late one night and he saw a car in a grocery store parking lot with condensation on the windows and a baby seat in the back, and he pulled over and knocked on the window, and when a young woman rolled it down with fear in her eyes, Marcus said, "What is your name?" And she said, "Sarah." And Marcus said, "I am going to help you, but not the way you think." And then he told her his story and gave her his card and $500 and said, "Be at this address tomorrow at 8 in the morning, because that is what you do when someone gives you a second chance and you remember what it felt like to have $17 and a baby and no hope, and you pay it forward, not because you have to, but because you understand that everyone is one bad break away from sleeping in their car, and everyone deserves the chance to prove what they can do when someone believes in them." Marcus never forgot that night in the snow, or the knock on his window, or the man who saw him not as a failure, but as someone worth saving. And years later, when Emma was 10 years old and asked him what the most important moment of his life was, Marcus did not say meeting her mother or getting married or even her birth. He said it was the moment a stranger knocked on a car window and reminded him that the end of one story is just the beginning of another, and that sometimes the worst night of your life is actually the doorway to everything you were meant to become.